Folks, welcome back to the show. Today I am going to show you my approach to fitting decorative end panels on kitchen units. That's basically these things. Folks, welcome back to the show. End panels are essential in a kitchen because they basically kind of frame in the kitchen units and stop them looking awful. In this situation, these end panels aren't great. They're not particularly well, they're not oversized at all, which makes life a little bit awkward when it comes to scribing things. Normally your end panels are a little bit bigger so that you've got some meat on them that you can cut off to scribe into the walls. These B&Q ones come at exactly the size of the kitchen unit. So for that reason, I've actually dropped the height of the kitchen units by 5mm. There's not a lot I can do about the depth of the kitchen units. We're just gonna have to cork up the back or whatever. In a property like this, a bit of cork up the back of the end panels isn't gonna cause a problem, but if you're fitting a higher end kitchen, definitely make sure you buy oversized end panels so that you've got some room to scribe them to your walls. Anyway, I'll just show you what I'm doing here, what tools I'm using, how I'm getting set up, and then we'll get these all scribed and fitted in place. As per usual, shout out to all the kitchen fitters out there. I am not a professional kitchen fitter. I do this like once every year or so. I don't do it every day. When you do it every day, you become very fast at it, very efficient at it. I am not particularly fast or efficient at it. So if you are a professional kitchen fitter, please pop some of your tips down below. Anyway, this is just my approach as per usual. So we've got end panels here. Just to show you, this is what a bare unit looks like. It's just literally a flat pack unit that I've assembled and I've fitted the door. I do find it generally easier if you fit the doors in advance because then you can work to your door with your end panel to make sure that everything's going to fit properly. But yeah, there's many ways to skin a cat, as they say. So obviously this is the end panel that's going to be going on that side there. Because of the design of this kitchen, we'll have an end panel on each side of these units, each side of these. Well, in fact, pretty much every unit is having end panels because we're having freestanding kitchen appliances rather than integrated. And as I say, there's many things with this B&Q. This is a B&Q Stevia kitchen that we're fitting here, and these end panels. I'm not particularly impressed with them. There's lots of things I've mentioned in a little bit more detail over on the member zone, but I prefer end panels where the foil wraps all the way around the front and then around and back on itself, if that makes sense. I'm going to lose that on there. Mainly because basically the way this is done, on this side, there is no gloss finish. This is just melamine and you can see that. So you shouldn't really be able to see the non-gloss finish of your end panels. That's not ideal. And also because of the way this doesn't wrap round, we've basically got foil edge banding and then melamine on that edge. It means that this is a bit of a kind of vulnerable area with quite sharp corners. So it's much better if you've got like the rounded fronts on your end panels, a bit like these, these are the wall unit end panels. And for whatever reason, on the wall units, they have wrapped the foil around, but on the base units, they don't. Anyway, before you start all of this, it's essential that your units are firmly fitted to the walls and that they are perfectly level. In this house, because the walls are so wildly out of plumb, I've had to use various spacers and things at the back of the brackets just to get the units vaguely kind of attached to the wall and plumb and level. So these are all firmly fixed in place and they are bang on level as well. So the way I'm going to tackle it for this end panel, first of all, I've got a 5mm spacer here and I've just brought the end panel forwards 5mm. So that is perfectly flush to the door, if that makes sense, at the top and bottom. So with the door fitted and the door is adjusted and everything is good with the door, ideally in that situation, your end panel should also be perfectly on the floor. There should be no gaps underneath it or anything like that. Don't worry about the top. We're going to trim that off last. And then you can see what we're going to have to trim off here. It's basically around this bulge in the plaster at the bottom. So we're going to have to scribe out to that. Either that or you could chop the plaster away. But at this stage in the renovation, I don't really want to be doing that. So all I'm going to do is pop some frog tape on the bottom. This still has the protective film on, by the way. I always leave the film on until the very last minute. So you could mark it directly on the film, but just to make it a little bit easier to see, I'm going to use a bit of frog tape. And I can see straight away here, we're only going to take a little bit off this bottom corner. The rest of it is already 5mm away from the wall, as I say, because we don't have oversized end panels. So all we can do is cork that gap. I'm then using an ultra fine Sharpie here. And all I'm going to do is just follow the spacer. So it's not going to be amazingly accurate, this. You can do it more accurately with a washer, and you can use the washer to do the scribe, but because this is going to be covered up by a skirting board anyway, I don't particularly care. That'll do for that one. I might as well mark the height for this as well, because we know that we're nice and flush at the bottom here, so we can chop the height down. So again, for the height, ultra fine Sharpie, I'm just marking on here. I'm just going to put 3 marks along there. That'll do. And then finally, I'm just going to write on the back of the end panel which one this is. So this is sink right. Pop that clamp back on just so it doesn't fall over. So this one, I'm having to use a 6mm spacer. So I've brought the end panel forward 6mm. So that means it's 6mm I need to trim off the back of this end panel. And then when I push it flush to the wall, everything should align perfectly at the front. So just double check, 6mm at the top, 6mm at the bottom, 6mm all the way up. We're perfectly flush there. So we know it's definitely 6mm we need to take off. So once again, a bit of frog tape. I can see that I'm not going to have to take anything past about there off. And again, this will be covered by a skirting board. So, you know, it is what it is. That's really all I need to take off that. And then once again, we're sitting perfectly flush on the floor there. So all I need to do is trim the top, do a little mark there, and a sanity check mark kind of in the middle, and a mark towards the end there as well. So then for the scribes, I'm going to be doing reverse cuts with a normal jigsaw blade, which I just think gets a cleaner cut, and it means I can see better where I'm going to be cutting. But you can use a reverse cut blade and do it the other way around, whatever. Depends how you've marked it, really. And I've also got the track saw set up as well for the top straight cut. And I'm using the jigsaw pendulum action switched off, and I've got it on quite a slow speed just until I get into this. So we'll just offer that up and see how we're looking. That's pretty good. I mean, as I say, there's not a lot I can do about that gap other than cork, but hey, it's one of those jobs. But we're absolutely perfect on the top here. I'll show you in a second. But we just want to make sure we're nice and flush at the front. If you want, you can use like a flat, like a bit of spacer or something like that, just to check that everything's nice and flush. Yeah, that's good. So just going to clamp that back in place. And just to show you, that's what we're shooting for on the top. I will be sealing this edge as well. I don't like leaving any unsealed chipboard. At the bottom we've got the factory edge which has the edge banding on, so we should be pretty safe. And I will be sealing that edge with a little bit of silicone anyway. But yeah, it's worth just going the extra mile on stuff like that with exposed bits, because if any dampness does get into this, so for example you've got the worktop and water might drip kind of underneath the edge of the worktop, if it gets into that edge it will swell up and cause the foil to start separating from the chipboard. Anyway, that's a job for a little bit later down the line. We just need to attach this end panel in place now, but just to show you, we are absolutely bang on with the door there. I'm using 30mm screws for this because these are 18mm carcasses with an 18mm end panel, so that's 36mm. So I'm going to use probably 4 screws to attach this on. If you're being posh, you can hide your screws behind the hinge brackets, but this unit's peppered in holes, so I might as well just make use of some of the holes that are there. I'm going to go for one kind of quite high up here, not with hammer action. Double check that you're definitely not coming through the other side, because that would be a disaster. These end panels aren't cheap. So I'm just wanting the head flush and no more. And that is one done. Now, because this cut is quite near the floor, again in an area that might get damp, it's like behind the washing machine, I am going to just seal that cut edge. I'm just using a bit of primer. Normally I prefer yacht varnish, but I haven't got any with us. Primer will do fine. It's just belt and braces in case any moisture gets into that edge. And interestingly, this really sums up the quality of this B&Q kitchen, but you know, you work with what you're given, and I gave myself this. These end panels were bought at exactly the same time, and the end panel on the left is made of MDF. The end panel on the right is made of chipboard. Wow, nice work B&Q, that is not great. And by the way, again, on budget kitchens, just little things like, look at this, the corner of this end panel without the protective film on. I don't know if you can see. Can you see all the like little black marks down that edge? I think that's the glue from left over from manufacturing, but that's a bit shoddy, that, like. But again, you know, you get what you pay for. Now, just to reiterate, there should be no gaps between your end panels and your walls if you've done this properly. I think this is the first kitchen I've ever fitted where the end panels aren't oversized, but in all honesty, this entire B&Q kitchen is bobbins, and it's the last time I'll be fitting one. Considering these end panels were upwards of £50 each, they're not even made of moisture-resistant MDF, or chipboard, or whatever other random material they had lying around in the factory. In a rental property with white units against a white wall, we can just about cork our way out of this mess, but this is what my end panels normally look like, so please be kind. So that is the base unit end panels all done, which means we are now onto the wall unit end panels. Now we've got a couple of options here, and it's all going to kind of hinge on how we're doing the cornice and pelmet. The pelmet goes underneath the unit, the cornice goes at the top of the unit, and on a higher end kitchen you would normally wrap it round, so you would end up with a mitre joint. You would just glue that mitre joint with a bit of CA glue, an activator, and you would wrap the pelmet around and you would wrap the cornice around. But on a slightly more kind of budget end kitchen like this one, it's probably going to be a safer bet to run the end panels long and just butt up the pelmet and cornice to the end panels. Mitered pelmets do look nice, but they do have quite sharp corners. You have to kind of ease them off a little bit, and they are subject to damage as well. Not an easy thing to repair. If they do get damaged, So I think on this kitchen we are just going to run the end panels long, but the pelmet up at the bottom. So that means all the wall unit end panels need to be cut to the exact size to match up to the pelmet. On this particular design of kitchen, the pelmet and the cornice are exactly the same. Now the important thing in all of this is that we've got a good edge on the end panel and we've got a bad edge. So the edge that's going to be cut off is going to be the bad edge. We're going to put that edge to the top because you're never going to see it. The good edge we're going to have at the bottom. That's going to be the end with the edge banding. So do not chop off the bottom and top. Make sure you keep at least one good edge. So basically the pelmet is going to fit on like that, and then the end panel will go over the top of that. So that means the end panel length is going to be basically the same on every single unit. So what I'm going to do, I don't have a cornice at the top at the minute, so I'm just going to measure down from the top, and we're looking at 755 at the moment. And then we also need to add on the height of the cornice from the bottom, which is basically 36. Well, probably 35 actually, 35. So we're going to have 755 plus 35, which is 790, isn't it? To give myself a little bit of wiggle room, I'm going to make it 791, I think. So I'm going to cut the end panel to 791. I don't have my rail saw square with me, but this is fine, just a sanity check. Looks pretty good to me. So the wall panel's cut to the correct height now, and obviously we've got the good edge on that edge, bad edge on that edge, and because this has a profile where we want to trim off this stupid kind of rounded edge that it has, we want that rounded edge to the back, so our good edge is at the front. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to match up this to check for height. So we're going to be about there basically. So the next challenge is that we need to scribe out this back, or trim off the back so that the front matches up. And I think the best way that we're going to be able to do this, because the tricky thing with wall units is that there's nowhere to put a clamp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the doors off, and then hopefully we'll be able to get a clamp in. But what we need to do is cater for this gap that we've got up this edge due to the thickness of the hinge. I can't make that gap any smaller on these particular units. So I know we've got an 18mm door, and that gap is basically exactly 3mm. So we're looking at 21mm that we're going to come out. So let me just whip this door off and I'll show you what we're going to do. So I'm actually going to show you this on a different unit because it's a bit easier to get the camera in. So all I've done here, I've clamped on this end panel and it's at exactly the correct height. It's already cut the height, so we know that the pelmet is going to go like that, the cornice is going to go like that, and obviously we need to chop a certain amount off the back edge. So in other words, some of this all the way up needs to kind of disappear. So to start off with, I'm just taking my adjustable square and I'm just getting the front of this perfectly parallel to the front of that. So basically I want the same gap at the top and bottom. So if I just lock the square like that and then check the top, then yeah, that is perfectly parallel. That's exactly the same distance all the way down, as you can see. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, we need to allow for the thickness of the door plus the gap of the hinge. We know the door is 18mm. We know the hinge gap is about 3mm. So that means this much material needs chopped off, but at the back, not the front. So how much material is that? Well, that is exactly, using some spacers, that is 18mm. So I've got 3 6mm spacers there. And that's the same all the way up because this is parallel to that, so it has to be correct. So all I now need to do with my little ultra fine Sharpie is take our 18mm and we'll just put a mark there at the bottom. The protective cover is still on this, by the way, so I'm safe marking it. And then I'm going to do exactly the same at the top. I mean, we'll check it all the way up. So I'll put a couple of marks on, but I'm not planning on scribing this again. This wall's pretty straight. That's a bit of a tricky one. There we go. And then the important thing here, we need to be cutting on this side of the pen line. So in other words, we don't want to take the pen line out. So if I line that up with the pen line and then move the track, what, 1 millimeter? It's literally the width of the nib of the pen along, like that. That's what we want to take off, because when we held our spacer in the correct place, we need to allow for the thickness of the nib of the pen, basically. So that should be correct there. And by the way, once again, how shonky is that? Half of the wall end panels are MDF and half of them are chipboard. Anyway. So what I'm doing here is a poor man's pilot hole, or a lazy man's pilot hole. I'm putting a screw in, backing it back out, and that's effectively allowed the screw to act as a drill to drill the hole, and then backed it out, make sure it's firmly together, and then bring it back in nice and tight. Nice. There we go, folks. That's us all done on end panels, base units and wall units. Took a little bit longer because I was filming it, but just go steady, be careful, because as I say, these end panels aren't cheap. Try and get better quality ones than the ones that I ended up using. And yeah, just the usual rule, measure twice, cut once, and hopefully it'll go relatively easily for you. Folks, any questions, comments, or anything like that, do post them down below. It's always absolutely fantastic to hear from you guys, and if you've got any extra tips, as I say, this is just kind of my approach to doing things. For those following along on the member zone, this is day 110, I think, of the renovation series that's on the member zone. So if you want to see all of that, sign up to the member zone. There's a whole load more detail over there. Folks, for now, as per usual, look after each other, be nice to one another. We shall see you next time. Taddy bye.